I realize that most of the time, whenever you hear me speak, you hear me as the pastor of Epic Church, and certainly that should be the case, but I just want to start with a little bit personally, just saying, Garfield and Casey, thank you guys. And I'm just saying this as a participant, not as the pastor. I needed that encouragement to be reminded that I'm not in this alone, that there are people with whom I get to walk through this life, and there are people who have chosen to walk through this life with me, and so thank you for that. Seth and Danny, thank you guys for leading us today. We need songs. We need songs from gifted songwriters. We need songs from people who are in tune with God and in tune with this congregation. And I tell you this personally all the time, Seth, and I just love that God's brought you here, love that he's brought you into my life. And I can tell you guys who don't know Seth as well as I do that the guy that's up here on the stage, he's better off the stage, and that's hard to say because he's so good on the stage. This guy could be doing worship ministry and has done it everywhere around the world. And God has seen fit, and Seth and his family have seen fit to be here with us at Epic. That's not a small thing. So thank you, man. Just as my worship pastor. And the reason I want to acknowledge these things because we're reminded once again how heavy the world is. I mean, the shooting in Buffalo last night that obviously racially motivated, 10 people dead in a supermarket. Even as I'm reading the news before I get up here to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn, 10 people killed. 18-year-old white man living out of an ideological view of white supremacy is targeting community. And it's a heavy world. We're still in a war in Ukraine. We live in a city and a nation that is not only tolerating but celebrating what God calls wicked really clearly in the scriptures. I think about friends who've been diagnosed with cancer in the last 10 days. I think about friends who have lost their foster daughter from their home in the last week. I think about a dad who told me this very morning about having to put an adult daughter into rehab soon. It's heavy. But we're not without hope. And what I really want to tell you, those of you who are carrying heavy things, and I think to some degree we all are, and I don't know all of your story, and you don't know all of my story, let me just give you two things that really, really are important for all of us in a moment like this. Number one is that to know that God is close to the brokenhearted. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. That's one thing from Scripture that I feel like God wants me to just remind you of. And the other thing is also about the heart, and it's this admonition, don't lose heart. I'm looking at friends with health issues. Don't lose heart. I'm looking at all of us going, will the world ever change? Don't lose heart. We've got so many people in our community right now who are sick in a variety of ways. We know COVID's doing its thing once again. And I just want to say, don't lose heart. But the only way to remember that God is close to the brokenhearted and for you and I not to lose heart is to make sure our hearts are aligned with one another's. And I just want to say, if you don't have a Casey in your life, like Garfield does, I want you to know that can be found here. This is not even part of the message, so I'm not being taxed for what I'm talking about right now. I'm just speaking to you as a friend. Guys, the stakes are too high, and you're not spiritual enough, old enough, wise enough, wealthy enough to do this by yourself. So let's just keep fighting forward, and what I promise you is this. We will reap what we sow. And unfortunately, we're seeing that in evil form all over. But it's also true in the kind of God-honoring, fruit-bearing, intentional life that Jesus created us for. And so let's lean into this together. But I do want to get into the message now as your pastor, but also as someone who's really trying to understand how to get some practical handles on the anxiety that I can be overwhelmed with too. And I know even over the weekend, this has been heightened for so many of us. But let me ask you, do you ever find yourself making a big deal out of things that aren't that big of a deal? Anybody besides me? I mean, they're really, really important things like we just talked about, but so often I am making huge deals out of things that just aren't that big of a deal. Like if you could have seen me acting a fool at my son's rec basketball game last night. Talking myself off the ledge like, Ben, it's just not that important. I know. Just something within me. But we're just always making things that aren't that important seem like they're that important. It's almost like the human race has gotten really good at making everything in our world a matter of life and death. And when you make everything in our world a matter of life and death, when everything is that heavy, it's no wonder that we're chronically anxious. Would you agree? Yes. Guys, everything can't be that heavy. It cannot be. And then it's a cycle. So when we make everything that heavy, we become anxious. And when we become anxious, even all the more, everything is weighty. Everything. Like I can't even decide where to go eat without being anxious. Anybody? Because it's on me everywhere. And so if I have that soul anxiety we've been talking about, then everything is so huge and everything is not that big. I want to ask this question to get us going down the road today. Who or what are you magnifying in your life? Who or what are you magnifying in your life? I just want you to be thinking about this question. I think this is one of those messages that would help yourself out to take some notes, not because it's going to build my confidence, but I just want us to walk away with, yes, a word that we've heard, but also a way to go and live this out. I just want you to think about who or what are you making really big in your life? And then just as you begin to get those answers, just ask the question, should those things be that large? And some of them, they should be. Some of you have got health things, you've got relational things, you're grieving the injustices of our world, which you absolutely should be. Those things are really heavy, but there are other kinds of things we're putting too much pressure on ourselves. I laugh at myself and I say it out loud so that the team can laugh at me or my wife can laugh at me and also remind me how ridiculous. Sometimes saying it out loud reminds yourself how ridiculous it is. So like 2 weeks ago when I was talking to Will, I was like, dude, I'm so stressed out about a message I've got to write for July 10th. Like, dude, you got a lot of life to live between now and July. It was like May the 10th. I'm like, what are you doing? Chill. You know what I mean? But there are other kinds of things that are really, really, really important. And sometimes what we've done is we've minimized what we should have our greatest magnification on, and we've magnified what just doesn't belong there with us. And so here's what I want to do today. I want to show you how who or what you magnify goes a long way in determining your current level of anxiety in any given season. And I want to do this by going to a text in Scripture that we would normally only go to at Christmas time. So I want you to see the response that Mary has when she finds out from God through the angel that she's going to be the mother of Jesus. We find that in Luke chapter 1, verse 38 through 46. I want you to stand with me. And whatever you're carrying today, here's what I tend to do with myself, and maybe you're in the same boat. I tend to tell myself that when such and such happens, I have to react a certain way. Anybody else? And listen, it makes sense to react a certain way. I can justify reacting a certain way, but Mary gives us an alternative. As she gets this weighty news, she doesn't make her life all about this weighty news. It's kind of crazy to me, but she doesn't magnify what she's just been told, which is, I don't know how she does it, but I think we can get some secrets here. And so Mary has just been told by the angel, you will give birth to Jesus. She's like, how will this be since I'm a virgin? And the angel says, the power of the Holy Spirit will come upon you and overshadow you. And then the angel tells her really good news, no word from God will ever fail. And then she also learns, huge, that her relative Elizabeth, who was said to be barren, is also with child. That's a huge part of this doing thing. You know, so much of your anxiety is based on doing life in isolation versus doing it in the right kind of community. So here we go, verse 38. Listen to this response. I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be fulfilled. Guys, if we had one verse to live out of for the rest of our lives, this might be the one we could choose. Whatever God says, I'm yours. I already said yes. I don't need to know the question. I don't need to know the direction. I don't need to know the command. I want to get there where God, whatever you have for me, whatever you have for our family, whatever you have for our church, we are the Lord's servants. May your word to us be fulfilled. Verse 39, at that time, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zechariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. In a loud voice, she exclaimed, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord will fulfill his promises to her. That's Elizabeth saying the same thing to Mary. Verse 46, and Mary said, my soul glorifies the Lord. I want you just to imagine, as you think about who or what you are magnifying, in this moment, Mary has an opportunity to do what we all have to do. She actually has a say-so, or she gets to make a choice for what she's going to make big in her life. And I don't know about you, but I would have made a big, the uncertain future, what's Joseph going to say, what are the townspeople going to think, and what are they going to say? But Mary makes it about something else. Let's have a seat and see if we can begin to walk a path that our responses, our lives might actually emulate what we learned from Mary. I love that first part. I'm the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. God, I just want what you want. I'm going to do what you called me to do. I'm going to step into what you called me to step into. I'm not taking my cues from the world. I'm not allowing other people, unless they're the right kinds of people you've put into my life, to direct my steps. I want you to direct my steps. And then I love what she does. Here's a great strategy. And I'm going to have you be thinking about people today. Who are your people that you can go to when you're anxious? What are your, of course, prayer, and we'll talk about that, but who are your people? I love this. Mary goes, it says, a lot of times our reactivity, as we're learning in this anxiety series, a lot of times it's about being in a hurry, right? And the speed of anxiety makes me respond so quickly so that when something happens or is said to me, I don't even think about it. What I love about Mary, she's taking time to think about it, but she does do something quickly. Oftentimes, we need to move quickly. A lot of times, our last resort is to go to prayer or to go to each other. And I love this from Mary. She goes to Elizabeth right away. She did not hurry in her reactivity, but she hurried in the rightful kind of response. And she gets to the town where Elizabeth is, and they have this moment. Now, two things are true. Elizabeth is Mary's safe person. She knows she can trust Elizabeth. She knows Elizabeth's faith. And now she knows that Elizabeth is in a similar boat that Mary is in. Neither of them should have been able to be pregnant. In this moment in history, they're both pregnant, so they spend this time together. Who are the safe people for you? Who are the people who will encourage you? Who's on speed dial for you when you end up in a situation that's something you've never been in before, what you thought was ahead for your future is no longer there for your future? Do you have someone that you can go to? I think about the friends that have been texting and calling. We've been doing this with each other just over the last couple of weeks because there's a lot of heavy stuff and new things going on in life. I think about the transitions. I've got friends transitioning out of jobs. I've got parents who are like Shauna and I who are seeing our kids close to transitioning out of our home, but we'll save that for Senior Recognition Day next week. There's just a lot going on. And so I've got to have your people. And then I love this from Mary. She sings this beautiful song. You can see it following 46, but just in verse 46, in the English Standard Translation, she says it this way. And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord." If Mary had magnified other things, no one would have blamed her, right? She could have magnified the uncertainty of her future. She could have magnified how her soon-to-be husband was going to respond to this kind of news. She could have magnified what the people in town were going to think about her and what they were going to say about her. But what does Mary do? She's like, no, here's what I want to make big, the Lord. And I think one of the reasons God says to Mary, you're highly favored, is because God knew that she had the right humility and the right confidence, and he knew what she was making the big deal of her life. And I wonder, what might it look like for you and I to begin to have our kind of response life like Mary's response? Who or what are you magnifying in your life? You see, Mary had a say-so. It wasn't completely out of her hands. Circumstances were out of her hands for sure, but how she responded, that's actually what was in her hands. She had self-control over what she was going to give her attention to, and so do we. Last week I said we don't have all control, but we're living life, or we can live life in good hands. Here's what I'm going to say this week. While it's true that we don't have all control, we're actually called to have self-control. I say this when I teach the Bring It Out course, but we spend so much time trying to control things that are outside of our control, and we actually don't control the thing we've been called to control, which is us. But so much about what you magnify in life is going to be based on your self-control. What I want to do when it comes to self-control is I want to blame everyone else for my lack of self-control. Right, seriously, if it wasn't for you humans, I would be awesome, right? My job would be amazing, except for the people. And I'm saying that generally, not to my specific situation. But I've been called to have self-control. I've been called to decide, Ben, how are you going to react? Because what I can no longer do is say, that person, that politician, that church member, I can't do that. Instead, I need to begin with, I chose to get carried away. I chose to react. And I need to work and regulate myself so that when those moments come, I don't react in the way I typically do or the way that the world typically reacts. I want to have a different kind of response. Another way to talk about who or what you're magnifying is just to think about this. Who or what are you giving your attention to? The attention thing, I want to talk about it for a little bit. I'm going to share some quotes that have been so helpful to me, but if you and I give our attention to the wrong thing, or we give too much attention to certain things, that will bring about the onset of anxiety. And here's what happens then, that vicious cycle. Once you're anxious from giving your attention to the wrong thing, it will become nearly impossible in that state of anxiety to give your attention to the right thing. So let me ask you this, how much of your anxiety comes from what you give your attention to? Now, this isn't 100% for me, but it may be 80%. How much of my anxiety, how much of your anxiety actually comes from what you give the bulk of your attention to? Here are a few of those quotes. First, from a guy named Peter Steinke, a book I read over the last couple of months in preparing for this series. He talks about how we as leaders, when it comes to the groups we lead, we really need to be that non-anxious presence that we've been talking a lot about. Here's what he says. He says, once anxiety, floods our brain, our attention is solely focused on the outside threat. We concentrate narrowly on something and we're unable to process other stimuli or to shift our attention. When obsessing about danger, our capacity to see or hear other information is nearly eliminated. I feel that. I feel that. When I'm all about this one thing, it has all of my energy. We all have limited capacity. You're aware of that, right? And so when I give the bulk of my capacity that's already limited, what I've done is I've limited the rest of my capacity to be able to do anything that's kind of productive in the world, to be able to concentrate, to be able to look you in the eye, right? When my anxiety is like that, it doesn't matter if you and I are having coffee together. I'm not having coffee with you. I'm having coffee with my anxiety. And coffee doesn't always help that anxiety either, does it? We've got friends that are like, I'm ordering decaf. I'm like, why? They're like, oh, man, you should, okay. By the way, what's your cutoff time for coffee daily? Come on, just give it to me. 2? Anybody not have a cutoff? That's just good to know. It's all right. It's good to know. These are the 6 people that we make coffee for on Christmas Eve services. It's like, no, come on. You're going to be up all night anyway. And we just become so anxious. I love this. I'm sharing a lot of Dallas Willard. By the way, if you've never read Dallas Willard, you should. But here's what Dallas Willard says about this. He said, wherever your mind goes, the rest of your life goes with it. Whew. Wherever my mind goes, the rest of Ben Pilgreen's life, how he interacts in his marriage, how he does as a father, how he leads Epic Church, how he preaches on Sundays, how he interacts with the people that he's supervising, wherever my mind goes, the rest of my life goes. This is why we read things in the scripture like you should have the mind of Christ. You should renew your mind daily. You should set your mind on things below. How much of my anxiety comes from setting my mind on things below rather than things above? Wherever your mind goes, soon after your life will follow. And then this, if you're not feeling guilty enough, this from John Mark Comer. Because what you give your attention to is the person you become. This is massive right here. In the end, your life is no more than the sum of what you gave your attention to. Just pause. In the end, your life is no more than the sum of what you gave your attention to. Well, what are the implications? He says, that bodes well for those apprentices who we want to be of Jesus, who give the bulk of their attention to him and to all that is good and beautiful and true in this world. But not for those who give their attention to the 24/7 news cycle of outrage and anxiety and emotion-charged drama or the nonstop feed of celebrity gossip, titillation, and cultural drivel. In the end, the sum of your life will be what you gave your attention to. So remind me, who or what are you giving your attention to? Who am I giving my attention to? Another author that's helped me, actually not a Christian, but a guy named Johann Hari, he wrote a book called Stolen Focus. Anybody read Stolen Focus? Anybody? Awesome. Well, there's some great discoveries in there. And here's one of them from him. Super helpful. He said, your brain can only produce 1 or 2 thoughts in your conscious mind at once. That's it. Your brain can only produce 1 or 2 thoughts, like clear thoughts, in your conscious mind at once. So I want you to think about, he's just saying this is a fact. I don't know that I would read the whole book, but the early chapters of the book were really helpful about how so many companies, and I'm not naming any companies because I know you're part of those companies, some of you, and I'm sure it's not you doing it, but so many companies, they're building entire algorithms for the sheer purpose of stealing my attention and your attention. Not hating, but I am being pretty clear. Like just when you read about it. And so we've got to have some other plan. And I think the great invitation, a couple of them I'll share with you today, but I think the great invitation for us is to really get acquainted with Psalm 131. This has been one that came to me early pandemic, and it has served me so well. 3 verses. I would encourage you to memorize it, and when you don't know how to start your day, just start your day here. Here we go. Psalm 131. My heart is not proud, Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. Instead, but I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. And then he says this to Israel, the nation under God. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore. This helped me so much. My life doesn't have to be all about me. I'm not going to be proud or haughty. I'm going to rightfully humble myself because I'm not God's gift to everyone and everything. I'm not downplaying myself. I'm just saying. And then he goes, listen, I don't have to have it all figured out. I can play my part, but I don't have to shift into the lane that is actually God's lane. There are things for God to do and there are things for me to do, but what happens is my anxiety, and so much of your anxiety comes when I'm trying to step into God's part and figure out everything. I am not saying check your brain at the door. Pursue the wisdom that God has told you and I to pursue. But no matter how wise you are, no matter how much experience you have, no matter how many degrees you own, at the end of the day, there's just going to be a gap where your things end and only God's things go from there. And you can rest not having to figure it all out. I'm going to share a quote from Ruth Barton about this text, and I want to see if you, like me, can relate to her words. So remember what we just read. I'm not trying to figure it all out. Here's what Barton writes. She says, the truth about me is that I seem to always be occupying myself with things too great and too marvelous for me. Anybody? I make it a game. If I look at this and that, I can predict the future. She says, that is things too complicated and weighty for the human mind to comprehend or figure out. I'm going to reveal a secret that may make you not want to have me as your pastor anymore. Ready? I love trying to figure things out. In the early days of, I'm just saying things I didn't share at 9. In the early days of Epic, here's what I would do. I would see the number of volunteers scheduled and how many said yes. I would look at the open rate of who read the weekly email, and I would predict how many people were going to be there on Sunday. Recovery mode. Lindsay, stop. But here's the reality. I want to figure everything out. Right. I want to figure the back channel to this. I just want to figure it all out. But here's what I've learned. What I'm trying to do at times for me, I won't speak for you, is when I'm trying to figure it all out, what I'm trying to do is remove the need for me to trust God. I feel better when I have some idea of how things are going to go, even if it's not really how things are going to go at all. And one of the things from Psalm 131, I love that ending because verses 1 and 2, they're so huge to me for my practical reality. But verse 3, the encouragement, Israel, put your hope in the Lord. Don't put your hope in figuring it out. Don't put your hope in predicting the future. Don't put your hope in what will or won't happen because you don't have control over that. But put your hope in the one who actually has all control. And as I think about that text, a few other questions emerge. The first two are these. What do you need to be content? And what do you need to know to be content? Because friends, if you have these things that you need to be content, and you can't guarantee that those will be present in your life more than 50% of the time, then you're in real danger, aren't you? Or like me, if you have a list of things, I need to know this to be content, and I can't know those things until after they happen, which really doesn't help me on the front end, then I'm in a place of danger, and so are you. Another question out of the text is, what might God be trying to wean you from? I love this in the text. He's like, I'm like a weaned child, meaning what? I'm no longer dependent on the things that I was dependent on. And he says about himself, I no longer, and they're not being graphic here, this is just what he's saying in the text, I no longer need to be nursed to be content. I have learned how to calm and quiet myself. Now, this is not man-made religion because he comes back with put your hope in God. So what he's saying is, I've learned to put my hope in God so that it appears to you like I'm not relying on something else or someone else to calm me. I've learned how to calm and quiet myself. What might God be trying? I think what God's trying to wean me from is me having to know all the things I used to think I had to know in order to move forward. Because the reality is, both in my family as well as leading our church, I have to make decisions without knowing all of the information, right? Now, we should get to know as much as we can know. But there's always going to be a gap between what I can know and what I need to know before I step forward and make the decision. So what I need to be weaned from is anything that I have or I'm trying to access in my life that actually would inhibit me from trusting the God who told me without faith I cannot please him. And yet I can spend so much of my life trying to remove the necessity for faith. Anybody else? And he talks about, I've learned to calm and quiet myself. I mean, if we're honest, we live in a noisy world. We said that last week. And we can blame everyone else, but think about this. While I blame the noise of the world for so much in my life, here's the truth. I'm way more comfortable with noise than I am with silence. And I'm way more fearful of silence than I am afraid of too much noise. And so I've had to work this habit into my own life. I've told you guys this, like I'm trying to start my days in silence, trying to end my days in silence. Here's what I need you to know. I do not know how we lower our anxiety without limiting our inputs. I just don't, I honestly, and this is not like, oh, Ben, give me the report. I'm just telling you this from my lived experience. I do not know how to lower my anxiety or yours without shrinking our inputs. I don't know how to do that. Because if you don't have boundaries when it comes to your inputs, then all you will do every second of the day until you fall asleep exhausted is take in input after input after input. I mean, think about this. Not too long ago, if you wanted the news of the day, you would read the local morning paper and or you would watch the local evening news. Anybody old enough to remember this? Okay. Like I never did, but my parents did. So that's, now every 60 seconds there's a new set of news, and you're no longer limited to your one local newspaper. You can read every newspaper around the globe. And it goes more than that. You can just refresh. And it's pretty crazy how it happens. And then you think about inputs into your, like the messages that you get every single day. When you think about email, I want you to add these up. When you think about your email, your text messages, Instagram messages, Facebook messages, Twitter messages, some of you guys trying to hit me up on a LinkedIn message. I don't even know what that is. Slack. How many inboxes do you have? Like just no shame. Just want to hear how many inboxes do you have total? 0, 6, 7, anybody 10 or more? We're not looking up, I'm just listening. Just listening. It's pretty crazy, right? But we tell ourselves we have to live and operate in this world. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that more often than once, but I do want to just ask the question, like, have we begun to call normal what is actually absurd? Here's how I want to illustrate the point. Imagine it's 1988. Your boy's 11 years old. You're either not here or some other age. And you're sitting out on the porch, not in San Francisco because we don't really have those here, but you're on your porch. And you watch your next door neighbor go to his mailbox 397 times a day. Huh? Absurd? I'm not saying we should go back. I'm grateful for the world in which we live and the world that we're doing ministry in and that we can broadcast this online to you. I just met 2 girls who've been living here as exchange students from Norway. They're like, this is going to be our church online when we go back to Norway at the end of this month. I'm like, I love so much about this. But like every generation, it comes with its inherent dangers. And here's what I think is true. If we stay in the current human default mode, noise and speed are going to end up destroying our souls. But again, kind of like the self-control thing, we tell ourselves, I don't have another option. And I just want to say that we do have an option. The invitation from God just keeps coming. I want you to hear this from the prophet Isaiah, Isaiah 30:15, just so you know that it's not just hard to say yes to God's invitation for a different kind of life just because we live in the 21st century. Listen to this from God through Isaiah. This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel says. Listen, in repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. But you would have none of it. And maybe God would update it in our time if he were to speak these words today and he would say, listen, I know you live in a world. I know what city you live in. I know what job you have. I know how your principals and your kids' teachers communicate with you. You've got to be aware. You've got to be in on that stuff. But I think he would then say, hey, I've tried to invite you into a daily practice and a weekly practice. But if he said to me after that, but Ben, you would have none of it. Yes, Ben, you had an important job. Yes, you raised children in the city of San Francisco. Yes, people needed to get a hold of you. But Ben, there was all this other discretionary time. And I kept inviting you in. And I encourage you to start your day. And I encourage you enough to trust me to do a Sabbath every single week. But Ben, you would have none of it. I don't want to be on that trajectory. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be on that trajectory. And so we need some way of starting our days and figuring out how to get quiet space during the day. We're only 1 week in, so I can't tell you that we've discovered anything really yet, but Sean and I finally kicked our phones out of our bedroom. I mean, we'll see. We'll see. Of course, to do so, we had to buy a really high-tech alarm clock. No, seriously, I've never seen anything like this. And it's so bizarre. It's like there's only one button on it. You know, she had to use her phone to program it. That's a whole different thing I want to go off on. And so the alarm's set Monday through Friday, 5:30, Sunday, 5:30 as well. And so it did it again this morning. So what happens is 30 minutes until it starts giving you some light, and then it takes it to a sunrise color, which I'm not sure that's legit. But it also has a whole like wind down routine. And so like last night, it's wind down time. And our room is the brightest I've ever seen it. I'm like, Shauna, what is this? She's like, it's for reading time. And I'm like, that's great. You probably could still see your book if you're 200 feet away, but you put this clock on my side of the bed. What are you doing? So we'll see if it works. But we've tried to kind of take the John Mark Comer idea of putting our beds to sleep, our phones to sleep before we put ourselves to sleep. And so we'll see if that works, but we're just trying to combat it. We know what's continuing to come for us. And I'm not saying we've discovered everything that's going to help us, but we're just trying to make sure we can bookend our days with this time of silence, where there's some space. And also, I think without that, we start magnifying things that aren't worthy of being magnified. There's a lot of big things going on in the world, but we want to remember the God who created the world and is sovereign over the world. And if we don't begin there, I think, with our days and end our days there, then we're going to get caught up in stuff that's not as important as we're making it out to be. I want to give you a little bit of shift, just to give you some practical application. How another way we can manage and kind of fend off some of our anxiety. Steve Cuss, who's got that book, Managing Leadership Anxiety, even if you're not a leader, let me encourage you to read it. It's a quick read. It's really helpful. He's got a podcast that obviously is free that's really helpful as well. But here's a question he asked, and I want you to ask these 3 questions. He asked these questions. He says, who are the people who give life to you? What are the places you go that are life-giving, and what are the activities that bring life to you? Again, things that you would, I think, do yourself a favor. I've been working through that this week and realizing that my activities one, I don't have great answers for that as much as I want to right now. I've got the people, I think I've got the places, but I haven't been doing some of the activities. Here's what he says to do with these questions. He says, get concrete on what the answer to those questions are. He actually literally makes a life-giving list. So get concrete on what those questions are and what the answer to those questions are. Number 2, calendar those things. Because that's the thing, right? Sometimes it's not that we don't have the intention, we just don't have the follow-through. And then 3, I love this. He says, thank and worship God every time you experience one of those people, one of those places, or one of those activities. Super helpful for me. I just think of a couple friends who are leading really high-demanding lives right now, and just conversations I've had in the last 2 months. One has made a commitment to go fly fishing at least a half day a month. I don't think that's my activity yet, but I told him I'm willing to go. Another friend has just received his boating license because he wants to build time on the water, which I love, into his routine. And so I'm trying to think through these. I'm gonna do each of those activities with those friends, but also want to kind of discover, like, what is my thing again? Because, guys, life is hard enough. We need some things and people and activities and places that give life to us, don't we? And you should also be able to answer this set of questions. Who are the people who drain life from you? Don't point to them. What are the places that drain life from you? And what are the activities that drain life from you? Now listen, really important. I'm not saying you get rid of doing the answers to these questions. I have things that I have to do that are on this list. Anybody else? Yesterday was spring cleaning day at the Pilgreen's house. Wasn't life-giving. It didn't drain me, but But I do think we can't just live lives where everything we do is draining the very abundant life out of us that God intends to give us. And we don't need to feel bad. You can still love people and have boundaries around how much they drain you. You can have places that you might not be able to avoid. Maybe it's the office and you can't get another job for whatever reason right now. You may have to do that every day, but you've got to have other things built into your life that are life-giving to you, and I really think it's important. And then one of the last things I'll say is I'm passionate about us living out our purpose. I want to see you do that with your life. I want to encourage you to that. That's one of my missions for me, is really to help other people live theirs out. But I wonder how much your anxiety, like mine, can get in the way of us actually bringing our purpose out in this life. Just think about this question. I don't have an answer, but I want you to ask the question. What could you do if you freed up all of the energy your anxiety is currently consuming? Who could you reach out to if you weren't so consumed with your own self and were anxious about that? What team could you serve on here at Epic? What could you do to impact our city or somewhere else in the world? I just think about the moments and seasons where I've been so anxious, I haven't been able, because that takes so much energy, doesn't it? And guys, if you give all your energy to that, you're not going to have much left to give to the things that God actually has assigned to you for this season. And what we want to do with each other is go, hey, let's get this stuff right. Let's magnify what's important. Let's give our attention where it's warranted. And let's make sure we have rhythms and the right kind of inputs that are going to lead to the life that God has actually called us to live. And I just want to leave you with this invitation from Jesus. It's familiar probably from Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. All of you who are weary and burdened from the last 2 years, from the injustices in our nation, from friends that are going through hard time, from your health issues, all who are weary and burdened. And Jesus promises to give us rest. But may it not be said as he gives us that invitation, hey, I offered you rest, I gave you the plan, I gave you the process, but you would have none of it. No. Instead, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Here's what I'm convinced of. Life is heavy enough. Let's don't make it any heavier than it needs to be. And let's invite Jesus and others to help carry the load with us. This is what you were made for. In the right kind of community that I think God offers you, even through this local church called Epic, if we do this well, here's what will happen. Our joy together will be multiplied, and I think our suffering together will be divided. Not only can I help you carry your burdens and you help me carry mine, but Jesus promises, Ben, come to me. Let us collectively come to him. He knows where we live. He knows our responsibilities. He knows our hopes and dreams. He knows what's really hard about your life. He knows what's hard about being a church in the city, and he offers grace for all of it, and he offers us a way for it to be carried not on our own, but with his help. So as I close, who are you magnifying, or what are you magnifying that doesn't deserve that kind of place in your life? Number 2, where are you giving attention to something that isn't that worthy of your attention? 3, what inputs do you need in your life? Maybe it's just that life-giving list. God, you know you made me so that when I'm in nature, I love this. God, you know you gave me this person. I got to get back to that person. I got to do with what Mary did with Elizabeth. I've got to do with whoever my people are. Schedule that. And then every time you do it, thank God. And then think about, where do I need to limit my inputs? When is enough social media? Enough. When is enough news reading? Enough. When is it enough? When is enough noise? Enough. Guys, if you don't do that for yourself, no one in this room or any other room is going to do it for you. But back to Willard, when you think about what you magnify or where you give your attention, wherever your mind goes, there your life will go. Choose wisely what you give your mind to. Let me pray for you. Jesus, thank you for the lesson today. Thank you that you care deeply about who we're becoming. We think about so many times in Scripture where your disciples, they wanted to go after all the things, and you said, no, guys, if you will just seek first the kingdom and the righteousness of God, if you'll give your attention to that, everything else will work out. I think about Mary and Martha. Martha trying to give her attention to so many things. But you said about Mary, she chose to give her attention to what mattered most. God, I confess publicly and before you that I have given my attention, or I have magnified things that were not worthy of being magnified. And today I want to begin to shift that. God, would you help us as a group? Would you help us as individuals to think wisely about what is worthy of our great attention? God, this is why we worship you, to remind each other, to remind ourselves, no, God is worthy of this All of those things aren't worthy of what God is only worthy of. So God, would you come and would you stir our hearts? Can I have your attention just for a second before we move into this response song? We're going to sing a song today that has been everything that we've been talking about already, and I think Seth, we have so much fun seeing how God leads together as we try to get our hearts open in the beginning of a gathering and try to hear from the Word, and then we want to come back and respond to what we've heard. That's what we're going to do. And after we do this response song, a couple of our friends are going to be baptized, and it's going to be a great occasion for a party, but here's what I know. Baptism isn't just for these two people. It's for some of you who have made a faith decision. You've trusted Jesus, but you've never been baptized. And I imagine this, like on a day where we're talking about what can you magnify and what should you magnify in your life, baptism is this beautiful picture of you magnifying Jesus with your life. So in a moment, I'm going to have all of us stand. If today's a day for you, even if you didn't know it when you woke up, God knew it. And we went ahead and got close for you and made arrangements so that you can step into the water and be baptized today. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and stand. If baptism is a step you know that you need to take, or at least you want to have a conversation with someone, please come see us over here to our right.